Hey everyone, Brad Porter here with my weekly Sunday update. So this week I want to follow up on a conversation I had with Jeff Wilke about bottlenecks. If you didn't watch the first episode of Deployed, Jeff Wilke is a brilliant leader who really architected Amazon's distribution network and the systems Amazon uses and the scale of everything we get delivered to our homes these days is credit to Jeff. And he talks a lot in detail about the drone program, about how that got initiated. Like it's very compelling content. Super appreciative of Jeff coming and being my inaugural guest on the podcast. We'll do these every 2 weeks, so we won't have a podcast release this week. Time to catch up on Jeff's. Next week will be my conversation with Alfred Lin, also fascinating. But Jeff talked about this notion of bottlenecks, right? The idea that in any system, production system, there are bottlenecks, and your job is to unconstrain those bottlenecks. So for instance, he pointed out that Jeff Bezos was an idea machine and they needed to turn Amazon into something where Jeff's ideas had a place to land, right? That the bottleneck was how to implement those ideas. So I think this is fascinating as we think about AI, right? But I want to give an example of bottlenecks first. Like this is our dock door at Cobot. We have one dock door with a raised ledge here. We have some, garage doors for some loads that can come in, lowered down, but we have one backup dock door. Okay, so why are most warehouses, these big, long buildings, kind of mostly flat, taking up big space off of highways? Well, off of highways makes sense, right? You want high throughput traffic, but why do you need so much space? Why not go vertical, right? And, okay, maybe it's zoning and code and all that's true to some extent, but typically the bottleneck is number of dock doors. How much you can load into a building and how much you can egress out of a building is bottlenecked off the number of dock doors. And so you need the surface area, you need the outside space to put all these dock doors. Now, interestingly, Amazon got very good at turning over dock doors, right? And so that allowed Amazon buildings to go up, right? And then you're using less land, more vertical space, it's cheaper. A big cost efficiency for Amazon was to be able to go up. But to do that, you've got to turn over your dock doors very, very quickly, right? So now let's think about bottlenecks in an AI world, right? If we think about the bottleneck we've had since World War II, right, where this technology advancing, adopting, what we needed was intelligence, right? And so we invested in our education system. We invested in moving people through to college and to advanced degrees, PhDs. We invested in the intellectual capacity of the country. And the result was massive amount of productivity, because it turns out that intellectual capacity can then be turned into technology. It can be turned into financial improvement. It can be turned into all kinds of efficiencies and productivity. And that productivity can be turned into better quality of life. And anyhow, the US has had great dominance in large part because it invested heavily in its educational infrastructure. But now we're starting to look at a world where we may no longer be constrained by intelligence, right? And Andre Karpathy talked about this on the No Priors podcast. I think Andre is incredibly insightful as he talks about things. So I try to tune in. He talked about the idea of like, how do we consume tokens, right? Like his view is if he is not consuming more tokens, right, which tokens is proxy for generative intellect, right, or these AI models, intelligence, artificial intelligence generating tokens, to be the most efficient human, we should be using the most tokens to do meaningful work back for us. Okay, so this means we're scaling up intelligence, right? And we're scaling up data centers. We're reducing the cost to generate a token, but we're increasing. And in fact, if you remember, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, where Satya Nadella talked about rationing tokens. Like we have a bottleneck that we aren't going to be able to produce enough tokens. In fact, the All In podcast also talked about this recently. This idea that there is a token generation bottleneck, right? And we need to build more data centers. We need, and that, and what they talked about, Anthropic revenue going up 6 billion, I think maybe 6 billion in a month, some crazy amount. And their point was, we are at the very, very, very early stages of consuming tokens. We're going to need way, 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 way more tokens, right? Because our capacity of turning intellect into advancements is not yet tapped. And the reason we've trained so many computer scientists is because we then want to turn intellect into code, into systems, but now we're starting to have computers, AI that can do that. And so our capacity is unlikely to be constrained anytime soon by our demand. In other words, the demand is going to exceed supply for a long time, and that's the nature of a bottleneck. So we're going to have a bottleneck in generating tokens. Jensen talked about this at NVIDIA GTC. Obviously, NVIDIA is in a very, very good spot because they are the core of like token generation, right? With their GPUs. Okay, but let's go further, because one of the things Jeff talked about was doing a 10-year plan at Amazon where he looked at, are we going to have enough steel? Are we going to have enough space? Are we going to have enough delivery drivers? No, right? So where are the other well, so the interesting thing is we're starting to see these bottlenecks. We're starting to see not having enough electricians, right? We're starting to see not having enough construction. And so a huge amount of capital now is pouring into building, right? Into literally building things. I was talking to an investor who was kind of saying, hey, we have a challenge that capital can either go into investing in things or capital can go into building things in the ground, and capital is shifting from investment to building. To some extent, we're speculating less, we're building more. We're building more, and again, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago with Amazon putting, the smart capital allocators are putting a lot of capital to work in building. Okay, so we need capital, we need energy, we need data centers, we need power transformers, we need all of this. But the bottleneck is going to become physical, right? In a world of unconstrained intellectual capacity, the bottleneck becomes physical capacity. Do we have enough mining equipment? Do we have enough material movement? Do we have enough manufacturing capacity? Everything is going to scale up, and the bottleneck is going to become physical. We're going to move from the digital intellectual realm where we don't have enough computers doing enough things, enough computer scientists, to a world where we don't have enough physical capability. And this is obviously where robots come in, right? This is where we're going to need, not one type of robot. We're going to need all kinds of robots, right? We're going to need robots that can help transform our world. We're going to have, so take an example in like biotechnology, right? Our ability to generate new drug ideas, right? It's going to be bottlenecked by our ability to physically test those, right? To actually, try and test. And so we're going to need to scale up, right? We're going to need to scale up in building new labs in dynamic reconfiguration, all kinds of capabilities. So I think it's a fascinating time, but as we look at the kind of bottlenecks right now, we're thinking a lot about token generation, we're thinking about data centers, we're thinking about power, we're thinking about infrastructure. But at a macro level, I think we need to think about how untapped intellect is going to meet the constraint of constrained physical capability. And we're going to need to debottleneck physical capability, and that's going to be done with robots. So anyhow, tune into the podcast. Let me know what you think. I'll keep doing these weekly Sunday updates as well. And thank you all for tuning in. Bye, everyone.